Sacrifice. It's the word that defines Berserk. Guts' life began with the sacrifice of his mother. His formative years were spent sacrificing his childhood and innocence, and he then sacrificed his adopted father in self-defense before sacrificing his personal freedom to join up with Griffith. What happened during the Eclipse was perhaps the greatest sacrificial act in Guts' life, and he's been trying to avenge it ever since. But the one thing Guts has never changed his mind about is his intention to protect Casca, keep her from becoming a sacrifice. But what if that's inevitable? What if Casca has no choice apart from being sacrificed? And what if Guts is the man doomed to do that act? We'll answer all of that and more in this video as we explain the darkest theory in Berserk. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Casca does qualify as a sacrifice. So the reason this question comes up at all is quite simple. Guts still has a behelit on him, and we have no clue as to how that thing is going to figure into Berserk's endgame. The most common theory regarding it is that Guts will, at some point, use it to become an apostle-like figure. And while we don't necessarily agree with that because of the kind of story Miura was telling, we can't deny that it is a possibility. The behelit has been highlighted in several of Guts' most harrowing do-or-die moments, most notably during his fight with Slan, where she directly taunted him into using it. Well, he didn't do that and took Skull Knight's help to fight off the Demon Angel himself. Let's consider a hypothetical scenario where he does become convinced that using the behelit is his only option to achieve his goals. In that case, Casca is most certainly doomed to become a sacrifice because, technically speaking, she satisfies the conditions necessary to become one. The behelit is a highly spiritual object that's tied to the fate of the person it's meant for. Once it finds that person, it clings to them in one way or another till their moment of reckoning arrives. It's sent forth from the abyss of the astral world with a singular purpose, turning its target human into an inhuman entity. All behelit users are either apostles or members of the God Hand, and the behelit not only serves as their summons to the other world, but also functions as the mechanism of their transformation. Behelits are described as keys that open fissures in their owner's hearts once they reach the astral world. Should the owner accept the deal offered in exchange for power, that fissure fills up with the power of evil, and the owner is transformed into an incredibly powerful demon with incredibly low chances of ever dying again. One of the key reasons this works is because a behelit user is asked to sacrifice what, or rather who, defines their humanity, and Casca is nothing if not the one thing that's still keeping Guts from turning into a complete monster. The thing about sacrificial rituals in Berserk is that they often give people great powers at great personal cost, and that cost is almost always the demise of a loved one. All apostles were granted their demonic forms by offering up one of their closest people as ritual offerings, because it's implied that those souls become part of the power source that they draw upon. The Slug Count offered up his wife, Rosine offered up her parents, Grunbeld sacrificed his closest trio of friends, and so on and so forth. These people weren't just killed because of their order of closeness from a social perspective either, in that Rosine didn't sacrifice her parents because they were her parents. The entire point of becoming a demon in Berserk is sacrificing your own humanity by proving you can heartlessly kill the people you care the most for. And there is an argument to be made that Black Swordsman Arc-era Guts would have been just as heartless as the demons he'd been killing for 2 years. During his time away from Casca, Guts became the most unhinged monster-killing machine we've ever seen. He barely slept or kept himself fed, and lived for the sole purpose of slicing off demon heads or scrambling their insides with his arm cannon. He freely admitted to perceiving other people as worthless insects, and he was more than willing to gamble with Puck's life to achieve his own ends. But once he was reminded of Casca, via the vision in chapter 128, his humanity began to return to him, because Casca is kind of the definition of it. Pre-Eclipse Guts had no concept of proper love. He felt as though anyone who gave him the slightest bit of attention had the right to command his complete loyalty, because that's how he grew up. He was an abused child whose only gift from a parent was learning the art of killing. Gambino, his adoptive father, put him on the front lines of dangerous battles routinely as part of decoy missions, even had Guts assaulted in an attempt to drive him away. But Guts never really stopped thinking of Gambino as his father, because that abuse was the only form of love he'd ever known. By meeting Casca and gradually falling for her over a period of 3 to 4 years, Guts came to see just how human that concept could be, even in a blood-drenched society like a mercenaries. And when they finally consummated their relationship, he was able to pull himself out of that lonely pit of despair where abuse came hand in hand with love. During his time as the Black Swordsman, he almost forgot that fact. but when he remembered Casca was still alive and still his woman, he immediately rushed back to her side and vowed to never leave it again. Since he recovered Casca from St. Albion, Guts had been working overtime, fighting at least double the amount of spirits at night and spending twice as much time chasing down the childlike Casca, because without her, he will become just like the apostles he's been hunting. So, in that regard, Casca has already cleared the first hurdle for becoming a demonic sacrifice. She's the thing that defines Guts' humanity most, so she can viably become a part of any ritual that would be triggered by Guts' Behelit. And here's where the theory becomes even more credible. Guts hasn't dismissed it as one possible outcome of his vengeance quest. Guts has thought about sacrificing Casca before. So this all has to do with Guts' inner beast of darkness, which is one of the coolest personifications of the concept of malice in manga history. The beast of darkness is essentially an amalgamation of every single hateful thought and feeling Guts has ever had, given the form of a massive black hound in his own mind. It's not a real thing, but to him, it's as real as Puck or Ivalira, because it represents the fracture in his psyche. And that fracture is born primarily from his opposing desires to protect Casca and avenge the band of the Falcon. Now, protecting Casca, as we've already mentioned, is one of the primary driving forces in Guts' life. He wants to live long enough to give her the peace he feels she deserves after having been betrayed in the worst possible way by the man she most admired. But are protection and vengeance compatible? That's the biggest question Guts struggles to answer after recovering Casca during the conviction arc, because the latter is a feeling that's honed by blood and hatred. The will to protect the life of another comes from a deep sense of love and admiration. You wouldn't go out of your way to give up your life for some random stranger on the street, and if you would, congratulations, because your moral compass is a lot better than ours. Generally speaking, nobody wants to lose their life just to save the life of someone they don't know, unless it's part of their sense of duty and such. But conversely, for someone you've known all your life and do have a deep and meaningful connection to, you probably wouldn't hesitate to take on potentially lethal scenarios for them. Guts is willing to put down his own life to protect Casca as long as she remains safe, because to him, she's the most important thing in the world. And yet, on the flip side, she's also his greatest obstacle, because Casca represents unfulfilled vengeance from the Beast of Darkness's perspective. To the Beast, the Guts from the Black Swordsman arc is the true Guts, the one that doesn't give a crap about collateral damage, the one that fights every battle like it's his last, the one that wouldn't hesitate to make a sacrifice any decent human being wouldn't. For those 2 years that he was off on his own, Guts entered a very dark place where killing became his only solace. All he thought about was how he could track down the God Hand, and all he could do to achieve that goal was kill as many apostles as possible after extracting information from them. As a result, killing Griffith, the object of his greatest despair, became his sole sustenance, and protecting Casca gets in the way of that sustenance. If he's by himself on the road, Guts doesn't have to worry about going all out, because most of the collateral damage will be the damage he inflicts upon himself by not caring about consequences. But having Casca with him makes that extremely difficult, because he has to approach things in such a way that he doesn't end up harming her trying to protect her. He notes to himself that his sword feels a lot heavier than it did in those 2 years preceding the Black Swordsman arc, because fighting to protect and fighting to kill are two completely different things. And this dissonance manifests itself as the most chilling thought that Guts ever had, that he might have to sacrifice Casca to achieve his ultimate goal. In chapters 187 through 189, we see Guts contemplating the cost of making Casca his primary objective, which to him is quite simple. To keep her safe, he needs to give up on his dream of massacring Griffith, because those two things will forever be at odds with one another. And because of the increasing difficulty of doing the former, which he realizes with each passing day, Guts ends up thinking about removing Casca from the equation entirely. This isn't a conscious thought, because consciously he wants to do everything he can to avoid putting her in harm's way, but his subconscious knows that as long as they stick with each other as a pair of branded individuals, the road ahead would only become steeper, and so getting rid of her would probably make it a lot easier for him. At one point, we see Guts' mind being affected by an incubus, which is a creature that induces nightmares within the minds of those it feeds off, and the nightmare he has is frankly chilling, because in it, we see the Beast of Darkness asking him why he's suddenly stopped pursuing Griffith. He questions Guts' resolve when it comes to revenge and identifies Casca as the thing that's holding him back. He taunts Guts by telling him that she's become useless to him, a literal shell of her former self, and so what he should do for the sake of vengeance is kill her, as it was supposed to happen during the eclipse anyway. If he did that, he'd be free of any obligation, and he could hunt down Griffith until his last breath without any regrets. And to drive this point home, Yura shows the beast decapitating Casca with its razor-sharp fangs. It's at this point that Guts wakes up and kills the incubus in preparation for yet another night of terrors. But he's shocked beyond measure because he knows that the beast is the embodiment of his own thoughts and feelings. Though he denies thinking of Casca as a hurdle consciously, he knows that the depths of his mind disagree with that assessment, and what it culminates in is the blackest act of his soul. In chapter 190, Guts nearly assaults Casca, and this isn't something he does because he's in complete control of himself. After yet another emotionally and mentally exhausting day of traveling with her, Guts discovers that Casca has run off by herself and splits up with Puck as they search for her through the wilderness. Guts is the one who finds her in the end, but the way he finds her makes his unconscious mind kick into overdrive. Up until that point, he'd assumed that Casca was completely defenseless because she had mentally regressed into a childlike state. But when he finally locates her, he sees a few dead bandits at her feet and her clasping a bloody sword, which his mind instantly processes as the Casca of old having returned. Logically speaking, if Casca was to be cornered in her current mental state, there should have been no way for her to defend herself, especially against superior numbers. But here, she had defeated multiple opponents and gotten off pretty light in comparison, where the only damage she took was the ripping off of her clothes and a few nicks and cuts from struggling against her opponents. Guts doesn't take into account that this might have just been her muscle memory kicking in to protect her from danger, because that's exactly what it was. Casca suddenly regaining her warrior skills wasn't indicative of her healing, it was yet another tragic reminder of what she'd truly lost. But in his desperate desire to reconnect with the Casca of old, Guts forgets all of that, pins her down, and forces himself upon her. As this happens, the Beast of Darkness shows up in his mind, telling him to bite, tear, and penetrate Casca, to treat her exactly how Griffith did during the Eclipse, so he could get that much closer to defeating him. The Beast's logic is that to defeat your opponent, you must become him first. By that, it means do everything that Griffith did to you, and then some. It's only when Guts realizes that he's fallen under the Beast's control and that he's viewing Casca as fuel for vengeance that he snaps out of it and notices how badly he's injured her. But all of this transpires way before he gets the Berserker armor, which directly feeds and influences his malice as one of its functions. In the moment that he assaults Casca, Guts was himself, and he's horrified by what he chose to do despite everything he's been through. He knows that as much as he wants to blame it all on the Beast is a part of it. So really, he's the one who's been having these thoughts. He takes on companions after that because he stops trusting himself around Casca, and though he never repeats this heinous act ever again, he's all too cognizant of the possibility of it happening. As much as he loves her, Guts' desire to kill Griffith is arguably stronger because even after making new friends and reaching a literal paradise island, he doesn't stop thinking about it. In fact, being on Elfhelm only intensifies his thoughts of revenge because by getting there, he fulfilled one purpose of his journey. Elfhelm is a place where Casca could be safe, and more importantly, herself. The whole reason Guts wanted to get there was so her mind could be healed by the legendary Flower Storm Monarch, and once it's healed, he's happy to see the Casca of old. Yet at the same time, he's still broken because he can no longer interact with her without risking a complete mental breakdown within her mind, which only frustrates him further. He hasn't thought about killing Casca since chapter 190 concluded, but after she becomes as normal as she possibly can, he has nothing but Griffith to focus on, and Guts knows how dangerous that is. In fact, maybe that is one of the biggest reasons that he's a total mess right now, because shortly after getting her back, Guts loses her again. Griffith shows up in the middle of Elfhelm thanks to Moonlight Boy-related shenanigans, kidnaps Casca as part of his plot to keep himself secure, and try as he might, Guts proves powerless against him. He has to stand there and watch all of his blows miss Griffith as he flies off with the love of his life in his blood-stained demonic arms, and to say that the Black Swordsman hasn't been himself since would be an understatement. Guts gave up on fighting after Griffith kidnapped Casca and allowed his grief to swallow him whole for the first time in his life. Right now, he doesn't know what he can do to protect her because he tried everything humanly and inhumanly possible, and he still failed. It's gotten to the point that he doesn't even trust his sword anymore, something he once thought of as part of his own body. And to make matters worse, Fujimori, the current director of Berserk, made a rather disturbing parallel between Guts' condition in the Kushan Stupa and Griffith's condition pre-Eclipse. Sacrificing Casca might be inevitable. Guts' eclipse within the stupa. In anticipation of the release of chapter 382, Fujimori tweeted that the next narrative beat of Berserk was as difficult to piece together as the eclipse was for Miura, and he wasn't just trying to hype the audience by using that comparison lightly. Everyone knows that the eclipse is the greatest turning point in Berserk's history because it subverted all of our expectations about Griffith and Guts' futures and then some. The Golden Age did such a great job of highlighting their bromance that we almost forgot the final chapter of the Black Swordsman arc, but when the eclipse does occur, it becomes clear how Griffith went from being a human to existing as Femto, the demon king of longing. Deep down, Griffith had always been a merciless manipulator who was completely fine with sacrificing as many pieces as he needed to sacrifice in order to become king. His transformation into Femto was presented as a crystallization of this fact, and once he embraced his own heart heartless nature, Griffith transcended mortal bindings like love and loyalty. He became a truly transient entity, capable of influencing humanity's deepest and darkest thoughts, gaining power that regular people could literally only dream of. From one angle, Griffith betrayed everything he had stood for with the Eclipse because he sacrificed the very pillars that helped erect and stabilize his dream. But from another angle, it can be said that he shed off all the dead weight he'd been carrying around and honed in on what was most important to him, ruling the entire world no matter the cost. Griffith's tongue being taken from him due to torture wasn't just a minor plot element, it was representative of the fact that from this point onward, no one would have access to his true thoughts and feelings because he wouldn't be conveying them anymore. All he cares about now is the fulfillment of his dream, so it's quite troubling to see that Guts is currently following the pattern that Griffith's life did post his departure from the Band of the Falcon. After Helm was destroyed by Griffith and Zod, Guts hasn't said a single word of dialogue. He's had internal monologues that lament his helplessness in the face of his enemy, but he hasn't spoken actual words since Casca was taken from him. And this is very similar to imprisoned Griffith, who kept talking about his dream and Guts as he was being tortured to within an inch of his life. Guts has had one conversation with the Beast of Darkness, who's now free to do as it pleases because his despair has broken the chains that were holding it back. After being discovered by the Kushan Empire on the high seas, Guts submitted meekly to being captured and thrown in jail because he no longer had the will to live. And that's also why when Rakshas shows up in his cell, Guts uncharacteristically doesn't fight back. Instead, he presents his own neck to Rakshas, asking him to finish the job, which sends Salat into a frenzy. Even when it was decided that he would be locked in a stupa at the edge of the world by the new Kushan Emperor and Daiba during their mini-coup, Guts didn't resist because A, he was bewitched, and B, he no longer knew what to think. So what's going to happen to him once he's locked in that stupa and we finally see him again in person? Well, we take Kujimori at face value, he's going to find his Behelit inside that structure, activate it, cut some kind of deal with the idea of evil to gain enough power to kill Griffith. This would be possible because of the inherent ability of a Behelit to always return to its owner. Griffith's Behelit was separated from him for over a year before he used it, falling into the sewage system of the Tower of Rebirth, only to miraculously appear in the lake where the eclipse takes place. Guts' Behelit might just show up through similar means within the stupa, but there is a caveat to its usage that we haven't pointed out yet. The thing is, even if Guts uses the Behelit to trigger a sacrificial ceremony, he wouldn't exactly be able to use Casca in the ritual because she already bears the brand of sacrifice. This was something that was pointed out to us during his battle with the Slug Count, but those who are already marked with the brand cannot be marked again by another ritual. That's because, from an astral perspective, their lives are bound to the abyss, and doubling down on that just isn't what the idea of evil does. It's quite likely that if Guts triggers his Behelit, he'll have to use someone like Puck or Rickard as his sacrifice, because while Casca defines his humanity the most, she's blocked from becoming an offering thanks to this technicality. However, demonic rituals aren't the only thing that can use a person as a sacrifice. Ambush operations can do that just as well, and considering where Casca is at the moment and who she's with, it's quite possible that Guts would need to take her out irrespective of his desires. That's because, right now, Casca has been brainwashed into thinking she's a noblewoman who has lived in Falconia under Griffith's rule for much of her life. And the reason that this has happened is quite simple. It's because she's his greatest weakness through his transformation into the Moonlight Boy. While Griffith himself might be invulnerable, the Moonlight Boy sure ain't, and he's a part of Griffith's vessel. This makes killing the Moonlight Boy one of the only ways to take Griffith down as of now, and funnily enough, whenever the boy takes over their shared vessel, it always seeks out one person in particular. That person, as you probably guessed, is Casca. So you might be thinking that killing her wouldn't be such a good idea, right? After all, if he's drawn to her ode primarily, then eliminating her would eliminate his travel plans as well. But that's not exactly true, because the Moonlight Boy is drawn to the life force of both parents. And if Casca dies, that leaves one more person for him to go to, which would be Guts. If that happens, we can see Guts taking the kid's life because it wouldn't be anything new for him. When the Moonlight Boy was the demon child, Guts attempted to take its life on multiple occasions because he saw it as more of a demon than his own son. Right now, he's unaware of the connection between these two babies he's interacted with, but once he realizes it, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for him to use them to kill Griffith because Casca wouldn't be there to hold him back anymore. Even if she dies by another person's hand, her sacrifice will ultimately end up giving Guts exactly what he wants on an unconscious level, which is a clear path to pursuing vengeance. So even without the threat of the Behelit ritual being an immediate concern for her, the prospect of Casca becoming a sacrifice to feed Guts' hunger for revenge doesn't go away. In fact, It's probably gained strength since the Beast of Darkness chomped off its leash, because now even Guts has no idea how he'll respond to any given situation. If Casca were to somehow die during his allies' attempts to recover her from Falconia, he might welcome it because it will finally give him the push he needs to go all out as a solo warrior. If she's rescued and brought to him, he might kill her himself, especially if he has to wear the Berserker armor again. Either way, from where we stand, Guts appears doomed to sacrifice Casca unless the divine encounter he has within the stupa turns out to be the positive kind. Mori describing the next chapter as the beginning of an Eclipse-like event doesn't exactly imply that it will turn out to be just as bad. It means that it will be just as impactful, and what could be more impactful than our protagonist having his head put on straight by God himself? But he's talking about things in the same context as what transpired during Griffith's eclipse, then everyone else is screwed, especially Casca, for reasons that should be obvious by now. Marvelous verdict! But as for this video, that's all we've got for you guys, so let us know your thoughts on Casca's fate in the comments down below. Is she doomed, or is there no chance Guts would let her die? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then though, stay safe, conquer your inner beast of darkness, and remember to keep on struggling, strugglers.